So thank you for joining us for this webinar on how to maximize the paraprofessionals that we're using in our classrooms. But we're not going to limit this just to paraprofessionals. We're also going to be talking about how we do this with tutors and with volunteers. So this is going to apply to how we can maximize the use of additional supports in our classrooms, as well as how do we do this at all ages and all sites. So there were some great questions that people provided. We're going to try and touch on those, as many of those as possible today. A couple of housekeeping things. So first of all, we're going to ask you to put some things in the chat. You won't see those items, but we are going to read some of them. If you have a question, which we hope you will, please put them in the Q&A as one of your tools on the Zoom web bar, so that we can really find those easily and make sure to answer as many as possible. My email will be at the end, so if we don't get to your question or you just want to communicate after the fact, please feel free to email. So today we're joined by someone who has a lot of experience in this area. I'm going to let her introduce herself when we get to that part. But it's really helpful. Many of you have lots of experience in this area as well. So please feel free to put that information in the chat so that we can share that after the webinar. Today, as soon as the webinar is finished, you're going to get an infographic that you'll see on one of the slides, which will be helpful just to capture some of the information we're going to cover, as well as you'll receive an email with the recording and other information tomorrow. So thank you again for joining us. We're really excited because this is such a topic, such an important topic right now. So let's start with a poll just to get everybody thinking about this particular topic. And again, you can fill in volunteers, tutors, those kinds of things in place of paraprofessionals. But if you are using paraprofessionals and other support staff in the classroom, how are they assigned at your school and site if you're using them? So for example, are they assigned to a specific teacher and they're with that teacher all the time? Are they following students from one class to another? Or do they move between teachers? So go ahead and put some of those comments in the chat and we're gonna see what people are saying.
So Laura, I'm going to read a couple out for you. It looks like there are a few who have said assigned to a specific teacher. Someone says in grades pre-K through kindergarten, grade level assistants in 1 through 5. I also see follow special education students, assigned to specific students, move teacher to teacher. Teaching assistant assigned to specific teacher during ELA block, all 3. A lot of people wrote all of the above, it looks like.
Okay, so that's really helpful because you can see that there's not just one way that this is done. And so we want to be able to cover how you maximize regardless of how paras and others are assigned. So second poll question, thank you for that. Second poll question is, if you are using paraprofessionals, volunteers, and tutors at your site, are they trained or fully trained to support implementation, particularly of your instructional programs? It could be a math program, it could be a reading program, etc. Are they being trained to support implementation? And if not, why not? And then we'll look and see what some people have said about that.
All right, and we're already getting some responses. I have a few no's, a yes, but only for some. No paras. Oh, it goes so fast. Not fully. They are not paid outside of the school day or breaks. Teaching assistants are current college students studying to become teachers. Ooh.
Okay, so like pre-service teachers. Okay. So it sounds like, for the most part, and you're going to see some national statistics. So we'll see how what you're doing stacks up to what we're kind of seeing nationally. But I wanted to bring Cheryl into this conversation at this point. And Cheryl, I'm going to have you introduce yourself, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions about this because Cheryl's going through this process in her district, has tons of experience, and is implementing a structured literacy program. And I'm going to explain why I definitely wanted her to be on the webinar today. So thanks for joining us, Cheryl.
Thank you, Laura. I'm been in education for a long time. Been in it this is year number 43. So yes, I've been in education for many, many years, seen many, many changes throughout and had different roles in our district. And I'm from Kansas is where I am from. And you know, our paraprofessionals are important in our classrooms. They're important for us to just get them trained as much as we can. And as Laura said, we've worked hand in hand on this process, and it's changing. We're slowly getting to the point where we are training our paras to have some of that leadership role in our districts.
So how does we talked about the ways in which pairs can be assigned. How do you in your district assign pairs?
All three ways. Basically they have one teacher that they report to each day, but then they go out, and depending on if students have an IEP that needs that one-on-one, then of course they are assigned to that one-on-one person. But most generally, the majority of our paras go from teacher to teacher.
Okay.
But they do have one teacher that they do report to.
Okay. We know that just based on reading scores and things like that, we have a lot of students, while we're starting to implement the science of reading, but a lot of our students need intervention. And this can apply to adults as well. We have lots of adults in adult education programs and prisons and things like that. So how have you started using paras specifically to support reading, instruction, and intervention?
This past August, Laura was in our district, and we started Reading Horizons probably about 4 years ago, I think. And we wanted to get our paras trained because we know with small groups, students learn better in smaller groups. So by helping a classroom teacher having the area for those paras, having the exact same training, the para can go ahead and take a group and have that same instruction as the classroom teacher. So you're getting twice the coverage of students by having them trained.
And was this August the first time you've ever included your paraprofessionals in a training that your same teachers were going through?
No, it's not been the first time. As far as for Reading Horizons, yes, but not in some of our other areas, no.
Great. And how do you feel like you maximize them? We're going to go through the six general ways and obviously ask for input from other people, but do you think this training makes a difference? Having them be trained makes a difference in terms of how they can support classroom?
Definitely, because everything that they are doing is reinforcing what the teacher has started. And so it's just a continuation of that teacher. It's just, we're going right on to our next thing, and they're using the same terminology, the same, step-by-step things. It's the same. So they're not hearing one terminology and then moving to another person and hearing something else, and that student having to remember, now that was the same as, oh yeah, that's this way. They're the same. It's the same language.
Got it. Great. Well, thank you for that, because, and Cheryl, you're going to stay on and be on at the end, because I think we'll have some additional ways to incorporate what your experience has been. So What we do know too is that the number of paraprofessionals is increasing, and it has more than doubled over the past 30 years. So we have lots of teachers, although we're seeing, that there's a teacher shortage, et cetera. So having more paras in the classroom and being able to utilize them in different ways is probably going to be even more significant in the future. But when we look at some statistics, this was done in a survey by Education Week, that greater than 25% of paras said that they were likely to leave their job within the next year and go into a field outside of K-12. Primarily, that was due to pay. But partially, it was also because if you look at the things that connect to professional development, 42% receive too little professional development, 13% received no professional development in the last year, and greater than 50% received 10 hours or less. And often what that training looks like for paraprofessionals is things that are mandatory, like you're a mandatory reporter, child abuse recognition, et cetera, and school policies. It's not connected to what paraprofessionals and volunteers and tutors are actually doing in the classroom. And so we know that that's one of the biggest issues. And as people mentioned, very few of their paras are getting trained or trained fully. We know that there are differences between those schools who implement a lot of part-time paraprofessionals and those who have full-time, or a combination of the two. And we're definitely going to talk about that, because that was one of the questions that somebody asked, and I think that's important to clarify. When we talk about structured literacy, because that's specifically what we're talking about today, but this could relate to math as well. Structured literacy is a process, an approach, a way of bringing the science of reading into the classroom. So that outer ring are the principles of structured literacy, which are explicit, systematic, cumulative, and multimodal. So that all of our reading instruction now is based on the science. We know what can be super effective in terms of supporting students as developing students, emerging readers, and English language learners, et cetera. The inner circle are the components of structured literacy. Starts with phonology, sound symbol correspondence, et cetera. So when we're talking about use of paraprofessionals in a structured literacy classroom, we mean supporting a program or an approach or instruction that is based on the science. And what we know about structured literacy is very, very important, because for our students who need intervention due to dyslexia or specific learning disabilities in reading, et cetera, absolutely essential. But it really supports all students and helps all students to become more proficient readers. So we're going to jump into our first way to maximize paraprofessionals and volunteers, et cetera. So one is to support multilingual learners and other special populations. So many districts across the country are seeing an increase in the number of students who are learning English, and there's a lot of diversity in that population. So it could be students who are brand new to the language, have no English or very little English, all the way to students who have some oral language but don't have a lot of reading and writing experience, students with intellectual disabilities, students who are on the autism spectrum. So a lot of times what you have are small populations or growing populations of students in your classroom. How can paraprofessionals maximize our work with those students? One is just oral language development and functional English skills. A lot of times we do not have the time as teachers to spend the time really developing those oral language skills, and they're really important for these students. And that means sometimes we're just working with a small group to do basic kinds of language acquisition. When students who need help with the task, a lot of times when a student has an intellectual disability, they're going to move a lot slower, and that means, or we're going to reduce the amount that we're going to ask that student to do, or they get stuck. And if you have bilingual paraprofessionals, they can help a lot with translanguaging, with vocabulary and comprehension. In cases where they're not bilingual, you can use apps and other resources, even finding images to support language acquisition. So, and what we found in some districts is that if you've got an influx of a special population that speaks a specific language, something that you haven't seen a lot of in the past. They're actually recruiting volunteers, paraprofessionals, even parents to come in to support language acquisition with that particular student because nobody else in the district actually speaks the language. So the goal is really to identify where's the greatest need to support these students in our classroom. And this is a big one. It's actually growing more and more. Second, we have diverse learners in our classroom or in our sites. Even within adult education, we'll have students who are, non-readers or very low-level readers, all the way up to students who have some decoding ability, some comprehension ability, but can't quite get over the hump. So can't quite get to grade level, can't quite get to the ability to pass the GED, etc. So one of the things that happens when you've got a larger group of students, and for this population, sometimes a large group is 12. It doesn't have to be big numbers, but we still need to find ways to differentiate and to provide the most support for what that particular group of students needs. So what that can look like is that a teacher can work with one of those groups while the para works with the other. So for example, if you've got a small group of developing readers or students who really need that additional intervention, when paras and volunteers are trained and know what to do with those students, it becomes part of the routine. Or you've got another group of students who are more proficient and they need more enrichment. So maybe they're working more on writing activities or on comprehension. Maybe what they're reading is just a different level. So you might have some students reading decodable text, some students are reading grade level text, or any combination of those things. And being able to divide your students and support them at the level they need it can be really, really valuable and important, because what are students doing if you're working with one group of students and nobody's really working with the other? That means a lot of times they're doing things more independently. Is it the most efficient use of time and what that student needs? Another thing is stations, and stations have often been kind of the purview of elementary classrooms where maybe students move from one station to another. But what we're seeing is that that can be really valuable with all levels. And stations just mean that students are going to be working on a particular task or with a particular group for a period of time, and there will be some rotation. So that could look very much like the graphic. The teacher could be doing something with one group of students while another group of students are on instructional software, while the para is working with another group of students, and then another group of students could be doing independent practice, and they rotate. And so generally what I've seen in the past is sometimes schools will set up where that rotation or the stations are only 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And by the time students make the rotations, if they're actually moving, or by the time they switch up tasks, you're only getting about 10 minutes in. There's lots of different ways to do this over the course of several days or even a week, where you get that more time. So if I'm reading with a group of students, I really want the time to read with those group of students, whatever that is. Or the paras listening to students read, or we're supporting students as they're writing. So there's a lot of ways to do stations. The real issue here is schedule, getting a schedule. And that can be something that's just kind of built in 2 days a week or 3 days a week, where this is today what we're going to do are stations, so that everybody gets a chance to get some of everything, but that they're smaller groups and they're divided based on what those students need. So stations can be really useful. If you're in most sites, schools this happens to all the time, but even in adult ed sites, correctional facilities obviously are open enrollment. So, students come in at all different times of the year. And one of the things that can be really disconcerting in a classroom is when you've got a new student coming in, and what do we do? Because now we've gone far ahead into skills where this student has starting at the beginning. So what we want to really focus on is often the teacher will need to keep moving and they're going to be working with the bulk of their class. However, one of the things that can be really helpful is if there is a protocol for what happens when a new student comes in and the paraprofessional is in charge of that. That can be everything from just helping them go over the schedule and establishing the routine so students know what to do, maybe guiding them or giving them clues when things are getting ready to switch. It can be giving them some basic assessments so we determine where a student is and what do they need. And it can also be, if paraprofessionals are trained, it can actually be them working with the student or smaller group of students to help gain those basic skills to catch up to the class. And there are lots of different ways to do that, but onboarding to software is another feature, because a lot of times we have to help students log in. We have to show them how a instructional software path works. And there are lots of different ways that we can use paraprofessionals in that doesn't take away from what the teacher's doing in the class, which is really important. And then one-on-one or small group support. And this looks a little bit different than what we've been talking about. So for example, if, and we're going to talk about what happens in a tier 1 classroom or a whole group and how pairs can support that. But let's just say that during regular instruction in a whole group, we notice that there are several students who are going to need additional support or time or practice opportunities with that particular skill. They're not always going to need it for every single skill, but we notice because we're tracking what's happening and we're going to need to pull those students. So providing that quote fluid intervention based just on the need. Supporting students who have missed instruction. So when students have been absent, a lot of times because we don't have a schedule, a plan, and a way to really implement that with a paraprofessional, it doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen very well. And then if pairs are trained, they can provide actually higher levels of differentiated instruction. I'll give you some examples, practical examples. I've worked, like Cheryl, I've been in education a long time. And often what we're finding is your pairs have been there longer than the teachers have been. So you have teachers that come and go, or maybe they move to administration, or they go to a different grade or a different class. And the paraprofessional is the one who's really consistent. With Cheryl's group of teachers and paraprofessionals that we trained recently, their pairs had been there quite a long time. Some of the best people I've ever seen work with these struggling students are paraprofessionals. And so I think we just need to, when we're hiring our paraprofessionals, when we're orienting our paraprofessionals, and when we're preparing to assign them, the more we can identify what does the parent need to be able to provide what we need in the classroom, the better, and do that from the beginning. So for example, if somebody has a real math background and they can support students with math, you don't always have to be doing the same thing at the same time. So one group of students could be working on math, let's just say instructional software with math, while another group is working on reading, and the next day they swap, or any variation of that. It can be very, very flexible. So one-on-one and small group support is a lot of what paraprofessionals have done over the years, but could do more of. So our friend Lindsay Kemeny, who is the author of 7 Mighty Moves, I'm going to show you that in just a second. I reached out to her because you'll see she's written a book about this for the lower grades. And I asked her just how does she use a para? She has one para for 45 minutes a day, and she has her manage the other students while she's working in small groups with her other students, right? So and I said, well, what specifically does that paraprofessional do? She monitors students who are working independently. She supports students when they're stuck, and we know that happens for a variety of reasons. Everything from I can't find a pencil to I don't have my earbuds, so I can't get on the software, I can't find them. Keeping students on track, that is really important in all levels of classrooms, and pulling individual students for review when they need it, and listening to students read. Especially if you've got a group of lower level readers who really need things like decodable text. So those things can apply regardless of what age and population you're working with, if the para is given those assignments and knows how to implement them. Software is another big feature because there is a lot of instructional software happening in classrooms, and that can be really useful to take a big classroom and make it smaller. So some of the things that are really helpful is if students have a goal on the software. So for example, the goal for you today is to finish this lesson. The goal is for you to do these five math problems. The goal for you is to read this passage and answer the comprehension questions. And really that takes somebody monitoring that students, first of all, are doing what they're supposed to be doing. We know that can be a challenge. Also, if software is sending messages or we're seeing that students are struggling, right then it can be addressed. We could have them collecting data, because a lot of times we'll be getting data from software and or reports, so that we can really maximize that. So its para could notice this student really is struggling, did not pass or complete this assignment on the software, and that way the teacher is informed so that they can make a plan. So it's really that collaboration between what's happening in the classroom and becoming more partners than thinking of teacher and para, teacher and volunteer. One of the questions that was asked was, we have volunteers and sometimes they get bored and they leave, they don't stay. And that's because we're not giving them responsibilities. We're not assigning them things that are really valuable, so that they do get bored, just like everybody else, right? So how can paraprofessionals support students during Tier 1 instruction? So when a teacher is teaching, what's the value of having a paraprofessional if the teacher's up there doing the instruction? And there are lots of different ways. One is eyes and ears. Anybody who's worked in a classroom knows there's a kid in the back who's not doing anything, or maybe has his head down, or maybe doesn't feel well, or maybe is squinting a lot because they're in the back and they can't see. The eyes and ears in a classroom are incredibly valuable. And especially if paraprofessionals or volunteers have a notebook or something, so they can be writing notes, because often we'll forget after that class is over, so that there can be those collaborative conversations. Data tracking. Data tracking can happen while a teacher is teaching. We have data tracking sheets, for example, that really help identify this student I noticed during your dictation time or your transfer time, or even your instructional time, was not getting it, and maybe was putting their head down or something. That keeping track of that is invaluable, because the teachers often don't have time to do it while they're providing instruction. Checking with specific students. So a student often is off task, or really has a hard time, needs some help with fidgeting or whatever. If teachers know these are your first people to check in with, maybe 3 or 4 students, just to always make sure that there's a touch point with that student to keep them engaged and on task. Supporting multilingual learners and students with special needs during Tier 1 instruction. So the teacher's talking about something, maybe they're showing something, and just having somebody go to that student and doing a translation or explaining something to them very quickly can be really, really helpful. Or just to let them know, after the lesson, I'm going to pull you and we're going to talk about what that lesson was just about. Floating during practice and independent work is really important. The more people, the more eyes and ears we have, but during small group and independent work can be really important, because it's very challenging for a teacher to try and keep track of everything that's happening in a classroom. Another thing is that often when we're doing small groups or stations, there's some setup. So one of the things that paraprofessional can do is make sure that the stations or those rotations are set up. So if we're going to be doing this at this table, that those resources are right there. That frees up the teacher so that they can go ahead and make sure that we're managing the transition between one group to another, etc. And all of those things are already provided and ready to go. That is extremely useful in terms of just time management. Another question that was asked was, what about paraprofessionals supporting things like higher level skills, critical thinking, comprehension, writing? So we're going to talk about a couple of different things. One is reading with and to students. So if you have students with severe dyslexia, that often means that the print piece is going to get in the way. So you may be reading with or to students and still working with them on comprehension activities, etc. What they're able to comprehend, but they comprehend better when they listen to something read while they're gaining those skills. So reading with and to students, if they have been working on math word problems or a passage or a novel or something like that. Chunking material can be really important for many students. We often give our students pages of text at a time, and they really need it broken down. So really helping to chunk material so that they can do exactly what their classmates are doing in that tier 1 instruction, but we're just going to lessen the load. We're going to reduce the cognitive load. Just discussing content with students can be very helpful for critical thinking and comprehension because, and just like the thing on the right where you're asking questions, we're not giving them answers. We're discussing what is being read or what is being asked for, and then we're guiding them through that. And paraprofessionals often do that extremely well when they know what to do. Another, I found this technique very useful in my class. So when students were doing things independently, they had red, green, and yellow stickers or little cards. And as they were working, rather than having to raise their hand and wait for somebody to come to them or whatever, they would, if they were green, that means they were good to go. They don't need any help. If they put up or just put a yellow thing on their desk or table, that's like, I have a question, I need some help, I can keep working. If they put a red card, it means I need somebody to, because I can't really move on. I have a question, I need some help with something or whatever. And what's really helpful with that very easy and silent process, so that students are not shouting out, I need this or I need that, is just that as the para and or teacher are walking around, they can stop and address those issues and keep students working. And that can be really, really helpful. Then if you notice that you've got some students that are consistently putting those red cards out, they may need an additional time for support. So we are going to say, you know what, I'm noticing that these 3 students really do struggle writing a complete sentence or with some grammar or punctuation. Then we can really, again, track that data and then pull them for additional support. So lots of different ways to do that. I think the other thing is that, you know, the recommendations for how we can maximize them include the understanding that rather they're full-time or part-time, there has to be some training. And people often mention, well, they only get paid for what's in the class. And I think what Cheryl and many other administrators and teachers are realizing is that if you bring them in for several hours or even a full day of training, the value that they bring when we've paid them that extra money to be able to get what they need to support the classroom is well worth it. We can ask Cheryl that at the end, but you know, having them really being very specific and intentional about what we're going to be using our pairs for, what the schedule is going to look like, etc. This is how we keep our volunteers and others engaged, is giving them specific areas of responsibility. So maybe it is that they're always going to work with these couple of students. They're always going to check in with this student. They're always going to have a particular task like setting up groups. When they feel valued and when they know what to do, you won't have some of those issues. And again, we just maximize and make that process more efficient. The more we collaborate together in planning and scheduling and looking at student progress, the better this can work. And then checking in regularly for input. I know that many paraprofessionals don't feel valued. Nobody ever asks for their opinion. Nobody really treats them as a professional. And that doesn't mean intentionally doesn't do that. It's just that, oh, they're paras. And I think really changing the mindset of how we view them and their value in the classroom can make a huge difference. So I'd like to open it up too, and then in the chat. So we've talked about 6 ways. You're going to get a copy of this infographic. It'll come in your email after today's session, as well as the recording, as I mentioned later. But I would really like to have people put in the chat, what are other ways that you found to maximize paraprofessionals? Maybe things we didn't mention, or it can connect to something we did mention and you found a way to do that. So I just want to give us some time to get some input, because so many of you are out there doing this work all the time.
Laura, can I chime in just a minute too with one of the
Absolutely.
things that you had mentioned on another why we're trying to train our paras. So many of the paras after the training thanked us because they said, we now know what the end goal is. We know what we're striving to do. It makes sense instead of just walking into a classroom and saying, oh, I want you to go over here and do this, and they were struggling. You know, our paras do not have unfortunately, we don't have a scale for them on their, you know, if they've received more education that they can get more pay. It's not that type of an incentive, but I think it was more of an incentive for them to just know and feel like their time was useful and helpful with the students, and they weren't just for lack of a better word, babysitting the kids while the teacher was busy doing something else. They felt like they were an actual part of the students' learning.
And you mentioned this before too, but a lot of it is just being able to use the same terminology and language. If teachers
Yes.
have gone to training and they're all talking about something and the paraprofessionals have no idea what that is, that just really reduces the amount that we can actually plan and schedule together. So when we say you're going to do transfer today, you're going to do decodable passages, they often never knew what that really was. And a lot of pairs were relegated to doing things like, you know, making copies, walking students to the nurse, those kinds of things. The need is so great out there right now. There are so many students who need intervention, additional support, and teachers who are maxed to the limit in many cases. And so I love that. I think you wanted to say something else as well?
No, I was just mainly just wanted to, you know, reiterate that they feel like they have more of a purpose in that classroom.
Yeah, there's a lot of this coming up about pay. We know that paraprofessionals are not often paid very well, that there isn't a scale for them. And I think what we're finding with the teacher shortage and with the number of students who really need that additional support, that may have to change. We may have to consider how do we, and in some cases, schools are making opportunities for paras to go in and they're the subs for the day. They're the teacher when a teacher is out for you know, a period of time at a conference or something like that. They know the students, they know the routines, they know the curriculum, they know exactly how to gain, you know, to use the time most effectively. A sub coming in often doesn't know that. So I just wanted to mention there was a question in the Q&A about the giving them greater leadership. When they have the opportunity to do this, many of them some people may not want to do that. Some people want to come in and maybe, you know, they work several hours a day, or you have a volunteer, something like that. But what about your paraprofessionals who have been there for many years, who do have a lot of these skills now, and maybe having opportunities for stipends and things like that? Those can be really valuable as well. Just a way for paras to see some growth for themselves. As you can see, many of them are considering leaving the profession, and we're going to be very challenged as a society when we lose teachers and paras, or when we don't maximize the use of our paras. So, any comments in the chat?
There are no comments in the chat. I was just writing. Be sure to post them either in here or in the Q&A.
Okay. So we wanted to give people the opportunity to ask questions, but again, so many of you sent in great questions prior to the webinar, so that we were able to answer them. Especially, let me think. I just want to make sure I covered everything that. Oh, somebody asked a really important question too. They asked about not just thinking about this from the perspective of paraprofessionals, but what about incorporating things, you know, people like nurses who often are doing, like they're maybe with a medically fragile student, so they're in the classroom, or a one-on-one para with students who have that in their IEP. Even with your speech language pathologists, I think the intention is to think about this really collaboratively as a team, so that one of the things that I remember really clearly is the gratitude of a speech and language pathologist who said, it is so valuable when somebody can, observe what's happening in the classroom and give me information about what the student is really struggling with right now in your classroom, so that we can work on those skills. Often what's happening is those things are very disjointed. The student goes off to the speech and language pathologist. We don't know what's happening there. And the speech and language pathologist doesn't know what's happening in the classroom. So there's not a lot of collaboration and communication. So the more we can maximize all components of a team, including our paraprofessionals, I think we could actually have a huge impact in the number of students who need additional support. So, all right, well, thank you so much. If there are no other questions, we'll be sure to follow up with some information after the webinar today, and we really appreciate you attending. You can see my email addresses here. If you do have follow-up questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Laura and Cheryl.